Hey guys, welcome back to another video essay. Today I want to talk about autism spectrum disorder and how it has been represented in film. Personally, this is something that I'm very interested in because I received a diagnosis of Aspergers syndrome earlier this year, and I'd spent 13 years of my life wondering, why don't I just seem to fit in? Why can't I seem to grasped all of these social skills that other people just seem to learn intuitively? Why do conversations exhaust me? Why am I so damn sensitive to external stimuli? Finding out that I was in fact on the autism spectrum changed my life because it empowered me to understand how my brain works, and it equipped me to manage my disorder and maintain my mental health. After I was diagnosed, I found myself wondering, firstly, have there been any portrayals of people with ASD that are both accurate and positive? And if those portrayals exist, are they beneficial to those in the ASD community? I did a little bit of research and found two films that people seem to mention most frequently when talking about ASD depictions in film. The first one is about a young woman called Wendy, who is played by Dakota Fanning. She has autism and she runs away to Paramount Studios in order to submit her Star Trek screenplay into a writing contest. And the second is Salmon Fishing in the Yemen, which is about a guy called Fred, played by Ewan McGregor. He has Aspergers and he is approached by a consultant to help her client, who is a sheikh in Yemen, to introduce the sport of salmon fishing to the people in that country. So I set out to watch these films and ask the questions: are they factually accurate in their depiction of people with ASD? And then secondly, are these portrayals ASPI positive? And then finally, as I mentioned before, if they are of any benefit to those in the ASD community. So first I watched Please Stand By, which features a depiction of someone with severe or low functioning autism. At first I was reasonably surprised. It seemed to be fairly accurate in its depiction of someone suffering with that kind of condition. Wendy prefers to escape into a fictional world because she can't understand the rules of the real world around her. She also has massive struggles with eye contact. And she also uses very strict rules to cope with the world. These rules help her to understand how she must function, and also function to keep her safe from those who seek to harm her. She has an inflexible daily schedule which helps her to keep safe and calm. And most importantly, she has a consuming special interest: Star Trek. I was particularly impressed with this detail because women who are on the ASD spectrum do also share the characteristic of having an extreme, absolutely all-consuming special interest, as do their male counterparts. However, with women, it tends to be something slightly more mainstream, whereas the guys tend to get obsessed with things that aren't generally considered normal or pop culture. There were also other special details that I really liked, like how Wendy only wears fuzzy sweaters and blue jeans, which is something that is commonly noticed among women who suffer from ASD. She's also constantly carrying earphones, which is a coping technique that we use to block out a lot of the external stimuli around us. And there was also one scene which I thought really showed well how sensory stimuli that other people just consider normal can become extremely distressing to a person with ASD. However, it wasn't all a positive watching experience. The further the movie went on, the more I felt like Dakota Fanning was playing a bundle of symptoms rather than a real character. It's almost like they made a checklist of common symptoms experienced by people with ASD and made sure to include a scene with every single one, and it just became really mechanical. In conclusion, as a woman on the spectrum, I really appreciated the fact that they decided to tell the story of a woman in the ASD community. Even though there are more breakthroughs being made in this area, autism and Asperger's are still conditions commonly associated with men. Women on the spectrum tend to mask really well. In other words, we suppress and cover up all of the difficulties that we are experiencing for the sake of just blending in and getting by with our neurotypical female counterparts. Thus, the diagnosis rate for females is significantly lower, and women only tend to get diagnosed in their middle ages, their 40s and their 50s, after years of pretending to be normal has taken such a toll on them that they have a breakdown and then their symptoms start to manifest in a way that is obvious. Thus, I really appreciate the awareness that this film might bring. However, I found that there was too much of a focus on the character's outward symptoms instead of her inner life. I genuinely think that Dakota Fanning did try her absolute best with this portrayal, but it ended up feeling hollow and one-dimensional. Thus, I'm not entirely sure that this film is beneficial, in fact, to people in the ASD community who want to be thought of as people and not just a bundle of symptoms, and thus I don't think I'll be recommending it to anybody. After that somewhat disappointing experience, I went on to watch Salmon Fishing in the Yemen. Whereas Please Stand By depicted low-functioning autism, Salmon Fishing in the Yemen depicts Aspergers, which is a condition that was recently taken from being a separate diagnosis completely and absorbed into the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. It tends to be on the more high-functioning end of the autism spectrum. As someone who has Asperger's myself, I found that this film was really accurate in the way that they depict it. As a first example, Fred is obsessed with salmon fly fishing, and the mainstream would consider that to be a relatively obscure special interest, which is accurate for a male suffering from Asperger's. I also really liked how they drew subtle attention to the fact that Aspies can become more comfortable when they figured out the system of something. For example, there's a scene where Fred is walking into his office and just confidently greeting everybody, and that's a clear demonstration of that fact. Aspies also tend to have problems noticing when people need to exit a conversation with them, either because they need to be somewhere else at the time, or because they're simply being bored to death by us monologuing. I thought that the film demonstrated this really well in a scene where Fred was hyper-focusing and obsessing over a cover for the magazine, and he's completely boring his co-worker to death. Once again, this film, like Please Stand By, also brought attention to the fact that Aspies struggle so much with eye contact, but it did it in a more sophisticated and nuanced way that I really appreciated. For example, Fred avoids eye contact with the Sheikh when he meets him, but he's very comfortable making eye contact with Harriet when he's explaining and using lots of big facts and just kind of informing her about something to do with his special interest. However, the moment she challenges him on some of the information, he becomes very uncomfortable and starts looking away again. That point also leads really nicely into another point about how they handled facts and statistics. Fred refers to himself as a facts and figures man. If you watch the film, you will notice that Fred is at his most secure and confident when he's reciting facts and statistics. Aspies love certainty, and we love to arm ourselves with information about our special interests specifically, but also just about things in general. It helps us to feel secure because facts are fixed and orderly, and it's something for us to escape into when the world is just too abrasive. There is also a really great emphasis on how Fred uses language. He has really odd speech mannerisms, like how he refers to Harriet as Miss Chetwyth Talbot, long past the point of normality. This probably occurred because he just wasn't sure how to ask her if he could just call her Harriet. Fred's language is also often excessively elevated, sophisticated, or formal considering the situations he finds himself in. This is a very typical Aspie struggle. We tend to either be too formal or too informal considering the circumstances because we find it so hard to judge the nature of a conversation and what would be considered appropriate by neurotypical people. There's also some other really great Aspie nuggets in the film, like how Fred wears the same type of outfit over and over again, or his complete disregard for appropriate office behavior, like him practicing his cast inside his cubicle. Fred also tends to come across as rude or lacking in empathy, or just being completely insensitive in general, even though in his mind he's just being matter of fact. He's also got these funny little rules, like no alcohol except on weekends and only after 7 p.m, which are very typical of people with Asperger's. And finally, there was a depiction of physical stims, like the fact that he clenches his fist repeatedly when he's distressed. However, while I found this film more overwhelmingly positive and accurate than Please Stand By, it doesn't mean that it was completely correct in every single aspect of how it represented Aspergers. The film seems to suggest that Aspies can only form real friendships with those who share their special interest. That initially was a statement that I didn't agree with personally, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's actually relatively true in my own life. Apart from my family and one or two friends that I have been close to since literal infancy, I have only been able to maintain friendships with anyone for any length of time if they have shared a similar level of passion to me in whatever is my special interest at the time. Nonetheless, I don't want to assume that that statement is true for all people on the spectrum, so therefore I don't know if it is entirely accurate. I'm also a little bit concerned that the film gives the impression that if a person on the spectrum can find a neurotypical person who appreciates and values them for their special interest, like Harriet does with Fred, that they'll experience success in their romantic relationships. And that's not a statement I necessarily agree with either. That situation would help for certain if it was a reality. However, it is significantly more complicated than that. The neurotypical partner would have to learn how to handle the obsessive tendencies, hyperfocus, limited capacity for social interaction, theory of mind struggles, possibly frustrating stims, and other difficulties that come with having a relationship with an Aspie. The Aspie will also have to learn to fight against the way their brain wants to naturally operate in order to make compromises in their relationship for the sake of the neurotypical partner. Finding this balance is extremely hard, and I don't think the film does a good enough job of touching on that reality. The great thing about people with Asperger's is it's very difficult to hurt their feelings. So it's alright, you can say whatever you want. That line of dialogue in the film has caused a lot of outrage in the ASD community because it simply isn't true. It has been observed that a lot of Aspies are not as easily offended by dark or politically incorrect humor, as we don't tend to value or even seek to conform to the standards and conventions of society. However, people on the spectrum are just as emotionally sensitive as neurotypicals, if not more, and our feelings can be hurt just as easily. The film equates these two completely different things and puts it out there as if they are the same. A lot of people in the ASD community have therefore decided that this film is not Aspie positive. However, I think that is taking it a little bit too far, which I will get into now. Fred's wife tells him that he is genetically programmed to return to dull pedestrian life because she thinks he is boring and inflexible. However, Fred does the opposite and grows as a person because he learns how to take risks. Salmon Fishing in the Yemen is a story about challenging our DNA and learning to have faith in people and in life. Not only does the film suggest that people on the spectrum are not incapable of change, but it also seems to believe that people on the spectrum can make genuine human connections with others who are not, such as displayed through Fred's intellectual connection with the Sheikh and his emotional connection with Harriet. While it is certainly not a perfect movie, I do believe that overall Salmon Fishing in the Yemen is very Aspie positive, and therefore I would feel comfortable recommending it to other people. Well, that is it for this video, guys. If you want me to make more videos related to cinema and this topic specifically, just give this video a thumbs up so that I know that you're interested in that. Anyway, until next time, cheers.